to Canada rather than Burger King paying American corporate taxes? Instead of encouraging people and to create jobs, what we're doing is trying to make that illegal. Why don't we just encourage people to make jobs? If you have more contributors and more people are working in good paying jobs, you'll have more people paying income tax, and you can balance the budget without putting more burden on everyone in this room.
You create jobs and you create a bigger base by building the economy. You build the economy by building your infrastructure, and you pay for building the infrastructure, as the president has suggested, by taxing those entities, those profits that are overseas that are not taxed right now. That's how you build, and that money comes to us. We benefit from that money, and it doesn't cost us anything. And you know what I just heard here was a little bit of political trickonometry, as I call it. You know, saying that I voted to raise taxes. What he doesn't tell you is that in that vote in the 2003 recession, it was right after 9/11, the 2003 recession. That was a temporary income tax for those making over $100,000. It was a 2-year temporary income tax increase for those making over $100,000, and it was 2-year temporary. He doesn't mention that. He also doesn't mention that in 2007, when the Republican mayor Bloomberg wanted to raise and did raise taxes again in 2007, I voted no. One of the few Democrats that voted no against that tax increase. That's called setting the record straight after some political trigonometry.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add was about, you know, taxing the 1%. There's this idea that if you let corporations have these tax credits, that they'll create more jobs. And they do create more jobs, but they're not living wage jobs. Woo! They get more bodies into their production, but they only make you work 1 day a week, 2 days a week, so you have to work 3 or 4 jobs. And they never pay you $15 an hour. So this is something that we definitely have to do. We definitely have to stay strong on taxing the 1%, the richest people in this country. And that money will trickle down to all these programs that we're talking about cutting. The money is out there if we do the right thing.
How's it going? I was fairly clear in all the opening remarks in your opening statements there, except for one about the AMT. So this question is directed to you, Mr. Gentile. What is this AMT, and why do you have to change it?
It's called the alternative minimum tax, and those middle-class families are now hitting that point where the alternative minimum tax kicks in, because when that was set back in the 1960s, it was only raised, I think, once since that time, and so back then it was a high amount. But now, as our wages have gone up over the last 30 years, now middle-class families who are struggling to pay the mortgage and pay the car and pay the kids and pay the schools are starting to hit that amount of income that triggers the AMT, the alternative minimum tax. And when you hit that point, you start to lose tax deductions. And when you lose tax deductions, that means you pay an increased tax. And that hurts middle-class families. So what I'm saying is either raise it or get rid of it so it doesn't hurt middle-class families.
A quick question about law and order for Dan Donovan. You've been a Staten Island DA for 12 years. And how many cases do you think you've taken to a grand jury? Ballpark.
We probably, between SCI, Supreme Court informations, and indictments over 12 years, 3,000 maybe, I'm guessing.
3,000 cases, and how many times have you failed to get an indictment?
Well, failure to get an indictment is a wrong terminology. You want to talk to me? Failure to get an indictment is
How many times?
You're assuming that.
How many times?
Let him answer the question. Pipe down.
You finished?
Yeah.
When you're saying fail to get an indictment, you're talking about an expectation of one. What we do with grand juries, unlike petit juries, is we present evidence and let 23 citizens decide whether or not there's enough evidence to bring charges against.
But I can ask this to Mr. Gentile then. A grand jury is not a trial. You're not trying to prove the person's guilty. You're just trying to prove whether there's whether there's grounds for a case at all.
Whether there's probable cause to move forward to trial.
Yeah.
Right.
And?
So, in the case of grand juries, certainly when you have 23 grand jurors and you present the evidence, it's hard to judge because you don't know what the evidence is. It's secret. So it's hard to judge how a DA performs when it comes to a grand jury. But when you look at other aspects of how a DA performs, you might be able to discern and determine how that DA has performed. And in one instance that the Staten Island District Attorney I have real concerns about is in the area of domestic violence. And the stats that show, the Office of Court Administration statistics show that the Staten Island DA has the lowest conviction rate in the city on domestic violence cases. And not only has the lowest conviction rate in the city on domestic violence cases, Staten Island DA also has the highest dismissal rates in domestic violence cases in the city. 77.1% of the domestic violence cases in Staten Island are dismissed. So that it concerns me. See, those are real statistics that you can look at to determine a district attorney's record and effectiveness. And when you look in the area of domestic violence, I have real concerns about the effectiveness of the Staten Island District Attorney's Office when you look at those numbers.
But we can't get a number from, you don't have a number.
That's it. Rebuttal is one for 3 questions is not fair. Rebuttal.
There is no office in the city of New York that has done more for domestic violence victims than my office. We're about to open a family justice center that I got Christine Quinn and Mike Bloomberg before they left office to fund so that women, and I say women because about 98% of my victims are women, about 98% of our aggressors are men. I have some same-sex partner domestic violence cases. I have some cases where a woman's an aggressor and a man is the victim, but those are rare. We're opening up a family justice center where a woman's going to be able to bring her children in and get one-stop shopping for all the services and her needs. I put ankle bracelets now on domestic violence abusers.
Right on, Danny! Yay for the women! Yay!
And give a woman a device so she knows that if her assailant breaks a zone of safety, that we have an individual safety plan for that woman that she puts in effect that's unique to her. I have hired a domestic violence coordinator that deals one-on-one with every single one of our domestic violence victims. It's the most difficult cases that we do in my office. And the reason for that is so many people don't want to follow through. And we have to coax them to follow through. I have a 30-day no-drop policy. When a woman comes in and has been assaulted, sometimes they're in the complaint room wanting to drop the case before we actually bring the offender in. And we will not let that woman drop a case for 30 days, and we work with her to ask her to follow through so she's not abused again. There's no office in this city that does more for domestic violence victims than my office.
Right on, Danny! You're right on that!
See, being a prosecutor in domestic violence, I know what he's talking about. I spent years in the Special Victims Bureau. But what he's talking about is certainly worthy, but he's talking about the social services that the district attorney office offers to domestic violence victims. What I'm talking about is the district attorney's role in taking cases to court and obtaining convictions. And this is the Office of Court Administration's chart right here. and shows the citywide conviction rates by county. And by county, it shows that Richmond County has a 22.6% conviction rate in domestic violence cases. This comes from the Office of Court Administration. It was put together, it was put in the book by your colleague from the Queens District Attorney's Office.
We're here to pick a congressman.
And
What's the Congress? Why are we talking about the DA?
Sit down, please.
I want to know
And
about
this,
the
and you ask about effectiveness, and that's the answer. It's not about the social services, which are fine. You want to know about his effectiveness as a DA and what kind of a leader he would be. You see that he is last in the 5 boroughs in prosecuting and getting convictions on domestic violence cases, and certainly last in, first. He's first in dismissal of domestic violence cases. That is a serious thing, and those who are concerned about domestic violence should take note.
Yeah, and to answer the participant's question about Congress, I mean, one of the things why we are talking about this, I guess, is because there seems to be a need for independent investigation and prosecution of some of these cases that are going on out there. I mean, these stats that you're talking about for domestic violence, for example, it seems like, are these cases, what were the causes for these to be domestic violence cases, and why was it such a low indictment rate? And, I guess to answer the gentleman's question initially, I mean, was your question geared towards the fact that somebody was strangled on camera, and the people involved in that probably got off scot-free? So that's what I was just wondering if that was what that question was geared towards.
There we go. Let's talk about Congress.
Question for District Attorney Donovan. I try to follow local politics a little bit from the Brooklyn side of your district. I don't know too much. Just like to know, what would you consider your proudest moment or your greatest accomplishment as district attorney?
I mean, 11 out of my 12 years as district attorney, we've led the city in felony conviction rates, convicting people of felonies. And the 1 year we didn't lead, we were in second place. That's a great accomplishment. But when we built this Family Justice Center, well, people dismiss the compassion that we have in the DA's office for victims of crime. We're doing real good in convicting people of violent, serious felonies. When I took office, the only person in the criminal justice system that didn't want to be part of it, I chose to do this for a living. Police officers choose to be police officers. Criminals choose to commit crimes. The only people that are thrusted into this system unwillingly are victims. And I thought the first thing that we would start to do, we've done very well over the last 12 years, is to provide whatever comfort. I never see somebody in a good part of their lives. I always meet people because something horrendous happened to them. And we have done exceptionally well in treating crime victims as best as possible, getting them through the system and getting them the services. That, my friend, is the greatest accomplishment I've had as DA.
Again, Dan talks about the ancillary services that the DA provides, and they're fine. I worked in the domestic violence, worked in special victims, so I know about those ancillary services, and those are fine. But when it comes down to it, it comes down to conviction and what you do as the district attorney in a courtroom. And the Division of Criminal Justice Services has a comparison of all 5 district attorneys, and it indicates that the conviction rates for felony arrests in Staten Island, that the Staten Island DA has the second lowest conviction rate for felony arrests and the second lowest conviction rate for violent felony arrests, which is the more serious kind of felony arrest. So these are charts that are put out by Criminal Justice Services, that's independent of all the DAs, and they basically rate them. And you can see this is the chart right here, and Dan could look at it if he wants. And the chart indicates that the district attorney has the second lowest conviction rate for both felony arrest and violent felony arrest. So again, I think that is a record that I wouldn't be that proud about.
I'm surprised coming from someone who touts themselves as a fellow prosecutor, or former prosecutor. We are the ultimate deciders as prosecutors of what the proper charges are. And when someone's arrested for a certain crime, they're not necessarily charged with that crime by a district attorney or by a grand jury. And when that report came out yesterday by NY11 saying we had a 98% felony conviction rate, the highest in the city, and that we had the highest 11 out of 12 years, those are based on our assessment of a case after it's been analyzed, after all the evidence. And sometimes people are arrested for felonies and they're not ultimately charged with felonies. Some people are charged with violent felonies and there is no violence in the felony. So we are the ultimate. I'm sure